In September of 1992, two hunters were trekking through the Wallowa Wilderness area of Oregon. They stumbled across something unexpected: belongings of a missing person. It was Kerry Field, a 17-year-old who had vanished almost a year earlier. They found his backpack and hunting rifle. Not far from there, authorities later located his jacket. It was lying on a ridge at an altitude of about 6,500 feet. And then came an even more unsettling discovery. Fragments of his bones, along with a single tooth. But the strangest part, there were large footprints near the area. Footprints that didn't seem to belong to any ordinary human. Kerry was no ordinary teenager. Born in Beaverton, Oregon, he had extensive hunting experience. He also had professional outdoor survival training. He knew how to handle himself in the wilderness. On November 13th, 1991, Kerry and his friend Mark set out to hunt. They chose the Wallowa Wilderness, a rugged area known for its elk. They brought plenty of food, a rifle, and even a thermal blanket to keep warm. But the day didn't go as planned. Despite hours of searching, they hadn't found a single animal. To make matters worse, they started to lose their bearings. By 6:30 p.m., the two decided to split up and search separately, even though hunting at night was prohibited. When Mark returned to their car later that evening, Kerry wasn't there. After waiting and searching for some time, Mark became concerned. He called the sheriff's office. The search that followed was massive. Over 250 people scoured the area. They were aided by helicopters, horses, and trained search dogs. For 10 days, they combed through a 12-square-mile radius. Yet, there was no sign of Kerry. Months went by. Despite help from volunteers, and even the FBI, nothing turned up. Until those hunters made their discovery almost a year later. When investigators returned to the site, they conducted a thorough search. Kerry's jacket was found on a steep mountain ridge. It was deep in snow, at an altitude of 2,000 meters, about 6,500 feet. A mile away, fragments of his skull and a single tooth were recovered. But here's the thing, there were no other remains. No ribcage. No large bones like femurs. Just scattered fragments. The sheriff overseeing the case was baffled. He said, "It just doesn't make sense. Why would a 17-year-old boy, no matter how experienced, trek so far in such harsh conditions and climb to that altitude in deep snow?" And then there were the footprints. They were too large to be human. To this day, no one knows what really happened to Kerry Field. Was it the wilderness itself? A tragic accident? Or, as some have speculated, something far more chilling? Whatever the truth may be, it remains one of Oregon's most haunting mysteries. There are so many strange details about Corey's death that make it seem even more bizarre and unsettling. After going through all the evidence, even the police couldn't come up with a clear explanation. I've pulled together some of the more common theories circulating online. Let's go through them one by one. The first theory, murder or maybe an accidental shooting. Some media outlets suggested that Corey might have been killed by someone he knew, or maybe mistaken for an animal and shot by another hunter. Mark, his hunting partner, was even considered a suspect at one point, but he passed a polygraph test with ease. More importantly, he didn't have a motive. These two had grown up together, practically like brothers. And then there's the fact that Corey's backpack, jacket, and bones were all found scattered across 3 totally separate locations. If this were foul play, it seems unlikely the killer would have gone to all that trouble. Once Corey's belongings were found, this theory kind of fell apart. The second theory, hypothermia. Corey might have gotten lost while trying to find his way back and ended up wandering aimlessly. His family supports this idea, thinking he could have been out there for some time before succumbing to the cold. But here's the thing, why would he head uphill? He had a compass, and he knew the general direction of where their car was parked. Plus, any seasoned outdoorsman knows the best thing to do when you're lost is to stay put and wait for rescue. On top of that, Corey had enough food in his backpack, and he even brought a solar-powered electric blanket. If he used those supplies wisely, he should have been able to survive for several days. The third theory, suicide. One of Corey's classmates mentioned that he'd had a really rough week before he disappeared. Apparently, he got into an argument with an older student. Maybe, just maybe, he felt so overwhelmed that he wandered into the wilderness on purpose. But Corey's family completely rejects this idea. They describe him as a responsible, loving boy who cared deeply about his family. They're convinced he'd never do something so impulsive. And then there's the fourth theory, an animal attack. Some think Corey might have been attacked by a cougar. But here's the catch. Corey was carrying a hunting rifle. It seems unlikely he'd be taken by surprise like that. Even if he had died from exposure and then been scavenged by a cougar, why would the animal drag his backpack, jacket, and bones to 3 entirely different locations? And here's another strange detail. The area where his bones were found was over 6,500 feet above sea level. That's a high-altitude, snowy, isolated spot, not the kind of place most predators would venture. Plus, no bite marks, no big chunks of bone left behind, nothing that typically shows up in a scenario like this. Finally, there's one more theory, and it's the kind that sends chills down your spine. On September 18, 1992, a local newspaper ran a story mentioning that during the search for Corey the previous November, a helicopter crew had spotted massive human-like footprints in the snow. At the time, they assumed the prints were left by searchers, but later photo comparisons revealed something shocking. These footprints were enormous, easily twice the size of an adult man's, and deeply embedded in the snow. Some were still visible even after the snow melted, suggesting that whatever made them had to be incredibly heavy. And here's the eerie part, the prints looked like they'd been made by something walking barefoot. What could have made those footprints? And could it have anything to do with Corey's disappearance? No one knows for sure. Even more coincidentally, in a community discussion post about the incident, someone shared a similar set of photos. They claimed to have found them while hunting in the same area. This gave rise to a chilling theory that spread across the internet. Kerry Field was killed by a giant. By giant, people are referring to creatures like Bigfoot, the Yeti, or wild man beings that aren't unheard of in the Oregon wilderness. Former California Sheriff David Paulides, who's investigated numerous missing persons cases, has made an astonishing claim. He believes that many hikers, hunters, and tourists mysteriously vanish in national parks or remote wilderness areas, and some of these disappearances could be linked to these legendary creatures. Based on the evidence and speculation, one final, unsettling possibility emerges about how Corey might have died. That night, Corey and Mark decided to search separate areas, hoping to find signs of their lost quarry before it got too dark. Mark returned to the car after a brief search, but Corey ventured deeper into the forest. As the evening wore on, he lost his bearings and ended up wandering farther and farther into the wilderness. Unknowingly, Corey stumbled into the territory of a Bigfoot-like creature. At some point, the creature began stalking him, likely following him for a while. When Corey was at his weakest, it struck. His hunting rifle and backpack were probably the first things to fall during the attack. The creature then dragged Corey's body up to a ridge, where pieces of his clothing were left behind, forming what investigators later identified as a second crime scene, using its enormous feet to move quickly through the snow. The creature carried Corey's remains to an even higher and more remote area. There, the beast dismembered Corey and consumed parts of his body. Afterward, it scattered what was left of his remains even further into the mountains. When viewed through this lens, the bizarre details his scattered belongings, the footprints, and the remote locations start to make a grim kind of sense. But tragically, Kerry Field's death remains a mystery to this day. The people who took it hardest were his grandparents. His grandfather tearfully remarked, to reach the spot where they found his remains, that boy would have had to walk 10 miles through deep snow. I can't imagine anyone making it that far. I always told him, if you get lost, head downhill. I can't even fathom what he must have endured out there. Our only wish now is to recover the rest of Corey's remains, so we can finally lay him to rest.